Hey everybody, it's Mr. Von Holtz again. It's good to see. Actually, I'm not seeing any of you, but I'm glad you guys are tuning in once again. At this point, we should be getting pretty used to these videos and the help that they're providing. Again, as always, we're learning together as we go through this process. So, as you're watching, if there's things that stand out that are really helpful, let me know in the comments. And if there's things that are unclear or could be done better, also let me know those so we can make it better for everybody. We're going to dive into chapter 10 and lesson 31 today of Toliver's Secret. And so let's get started right away. Again, as always, this lesson is assuming that you have already read the chapter by yourself or that you have watched the video of me reading it and have a basic understanding of what happened in the chapter, even though today we're going to be practicing the skill of doing that, of finding that basic understanding. So let's get started. Yeah. So today's lesson, again, is lesson 31, which is chapter 10, pages 122 into 134. And our objective is that today we're going to summarize a text by using a summarization strategy. I'm just double checking to make sure I'm on the right screen. Here we go. Good. And so the reason why we're doing this today is always summarizing when we're reading a fiction text is one of the, if not the most important and first skill that good readers master. It is what allows us to find out the main occurrences that are happening in the story and the most important parts. And if we're able to do this, then we can then do harder, more interesting skills like evaluating a theme or inferring a character's traits or discussing whether characters make good decisions or are growing in a good way. And so being able to summarize is the first things that good readers do most times and probably the most essential or most important skill to have. And so that's why we've been practicing it all year long. So before we dive into the actual lesson today, we'll get our brains activated and then I'll do a quick review of what summarizing is and some strategies that you can use to help it. Today we'll be using one particular strategy, but whatever strategy works for you the best, there's lots of different options here. So by the end of this, we'll be writing a paragraph summarizing chapter 10. A lot of you probably are in the habit of doing that after finishing the chapter anyway. So if you've already done it, that's wonderful. Go through the process with us throughout this video. And then when it comes to the end, just double check your work to make sure that it meets the criteria that are necessary for a successful summary. Right. Let's get into the vocabulary. The first word is assure. It's a word that means to cause someone to feel certain or to say something to make someone feel better. When someone's feeling upset or they're nervous about doing something, maybe speaking in front of a group of people, telling them, oh, hey, you can do this, that's assuring them, making sure they're feeling better. The second word is lanky, which means tall, thin, and awkward. A lot of cartoon characters, I think particularly right now, my son likes Mickey Mouse and his friends. So Goofy is an example of someone who is lanky. He's got very, very long arms and legs that kind of go in different directions than what his body's trying to go. That's what lanky is. And then grope is a word that means to feel about or to feel one's way with the hands. A lot of times groping is referring to when people are trying to find something that they can't see, groping about in the dark, where they're using their hands to feel and find something. Right. Before we get into the activation, I know the question I'm going to ask is a little bit strange. I don't mean for it to be uncomfortable. It's actually just a way to kind of open up our mind a little bit because there's a pretty obvious response to it. But I think if we think a little bit more carefully, we actually just expand our mind a little bit of situations that we're not quite aware of. And so in this chapter, since you've read it, you guys know that Mistress Murdoch wants Ellen to take off her clothes so they can dry. Ellen doesn't want to because she's hiding the fact that she is a girl. And so is it ever okay for an adult to ask you to get undressed? And again, before you start thinking about this on your own, the very, very clear answer is no. If an adult asks you to take off your clothes, don't do that. That's wrong. But there are certain situations, I think if you think very carefully, when we already do this. And so I'm asking this to just kind of spread your mind. So go ahead and pause the video and think about it on your own. Type it up. And now that you're back, again, want to make sure it's very clear. If most adults tell you to take your clothes off, don't do it. That's not okay. But certain situations, I would think possibly when you're getting a physical at the doctor's office or the nurse, or if you're wearing something that is not suitable for the weather outside and your parents tell you to get undressed so that you can change into your different outfits, would be appropriate situations. And so this was mostly just to open your mind to different possibilities and our first reactions. All right, now that we're past that, I'm going to do a quick review before we dive into our thinking questions, which look a little bit different today. A quick review on our objective and what that looks like. So here we go. Boop, boop. Oh, that's not what I want. I want to stop, present. Ta-da! And our objective today is we are going to summarize a text by using a summarization strategy. And so there's a couple key terms that I'm going to be using throughout the entirety of the video, most of which we probably already know, but it's always good to get a reminder. So the first term is just the word summarizing in general. Again, in class with me, you've heard it 1,000 times. Summarizing is taking a whole text or part of a text and shrinking it down to the most important parts. Sometimes we summarize whole books. Sometimes we summarize chapters of books. Sometimes we summarize paragraphs. But it's taking the whole part of something and then shrinking it down to its most important parts. Today we're going to be talking about characters. Characters are a person in a story. We're talking about settings. It's when and where a story takes place. We're talking about problems. A problem can take a whole different kind of ways, but in general, it's something a character wants but can't have. It's a pretty simple way to think about that. And a solution, we'll be talking about as well, is just how a character solves their problem. In some cases, it's also how a character does not solve their problem. And so that's something to keep in mind as well. And then last, we'll be talking about important events. And an event is simply just an action that either a character does or something that happens to a character. These things are, there's lots of different variations on all of them, so it's hard to give an exact definition. But an event is basically something that happens. Cool. Now, today we're going to be discussing two summarization strategies, neither of which are perfect, but they can give us some guidance and assistance on how to create a good summary. And so we'll go through each part of each summarization strategy. We're going to be using one in particular today, but I'll also talk about some of the failings that these strategies have to make sure that, especially as we're reading more and more complicated books, that we're giving the best summaries that we can. We're not just relying on these strategies and saying that they're enough, because in some cases they're great, but in other cases they're not giving us everything that we need to make a good summary. So here's the first strategy, which I call the summary checklist. Right? When you're summarizing a fiction text, there's certain things that all good summaries include. They will have the characters that are involved in that particular text. They will include the setting, especially if it's important to the story, which in a lot of cases it is. They will include the problem that these characters are facing. It will include the solution of those problems, if there is a solution. If there's not a solution, then we rely on this part, the important events. And so this is the most challenging part, is because a lot of times when we're new to summarizing and we're reading more complicated books, there's many different events, and trying to decide which ones are important and which ones are not is a bit difficult. A thing to keep in mind in general is that events are important if they somehow connect to the problem or the solution. And so that's something to keep in mind, is if we're trying to decide what events we should include in our summary, we should include the events that connect to one of the problems or one of the solutions. And then here's an important key step. We want to turn these into a logical paragraph. A lot of times when students use this strategy, their writing sounds something like this. The characters in chapter 10 are blah, 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 blah. The setting is blah, 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 blah. The problem is blah, blah, blah. And just going through the checklist and saying what these things are, that's not a terrible way to start, but it's also just, when it's being read, doesn't sound very logical. It sounds like a checklist. As good readers and writers, we want to do our best to make sure that our writing sounds smooth. And so after you've found these things, as you're reading in the text to help you, then turning them into a logical paragraph that makes sense, as if you were retelling the story, would make it a much better summary, rather than just a list of these important things. Yeah. The other strategy that we'll be using today is the somebody wanted but so then strategy. Yeah. And again, this is a strategy to help you summarize, and I think it's a very useful one, but it does have some limits that we'll see in a second. And so the way this strategy works is you kind of just fill in the sentence or the couple of sentences using this framework. And so as you're writing your summary, you think about the somebody. Who is the person or the couple of people in the text that you're reading that did the most things or was most involved in this section? Stories are driven by what characters want. And so you think about what they want in this particular part of the book. And usually there's a but. Okay, they wanted something, but something else got in its way. Brian in Hatchet wanted to get home safely, but a bunch of other things came up. He had to start a fire, if you're summarizing the whole book. And this is what makes stories interesting and why we like to read them. And so these are important parts to include in a summary. Next is the so. A character has a problem. They're usually going to do something about it. That's the so, what they do to try to solve that problem. And then is usually the result of them trying to solve that problem. Sometimes it gets solved, other times it creates a new problem. And then we can start the cycle over again, where something happens which creates a new problem, and so they want something new now. But there's something else that's causing that problem, so they try something else, then something else happens. And then the whole cycle of cause and effect continues, which we'll speak about in a little bit, makes stories interesting and happens when stories get more complicated. Very simple stories when you were in kindergarten, first and second grade, follow the very simple, somebody wanted something, but something stopped it, so they did this, then they lived happily ever after. You'll find that in this chapter, we can use this to help us, but a lot of times there's multiple problems in a chapter. And that when one character tries to solve one, they actually end up solving, or not, they might solve that one, but that creates a new problem. Or there's a big problem that's going throughout the entire book, and that in this chapter, they don't solve that big problem, but they solve a smaller problem that will lead to them eventually solving the big problem. So again, this strategy helps, but we have to be careful that we don't lock ourselves into just checking these boxes. Now I wanted to show you that these two strategies, all different, they connect. Now, the somebody from somebody wanted but so then connects directly to the characters, making sure that we find who the story or the summary is going to be about. These two pieces together, the wanted and the but, that is the problem. What they want and why they can't have it, that's the wanted and the but. This is where it gets a little messy. The solution will often come from the so, what they tried to do, and then the result of what happened. But like I said, oftentimes there's not a clear solution in every single part of the book, and this then can also lead to some of the important events. The interesting part is these important events sometimes don't, in this it comes into an order. In this case, important events can be spread throughout the entirety of the summary, not just at the end, even though it kind of looks like it through the checklist. Now, with both of these things, it's really important when we're writing our search to just be sure to include the text being summarized. If we're summarizing all of Toliver's Secret, we'll say Toliver's Secret is about Ellen, and then we go on from there. But if we're summarizing a particular chapter like we are today, we'll say in chapter 10 of Toliver's Secret, and then we'll go on to summarizing. Just something to keep in mind. That will make it an even better summary. So, now that we've seen the strategies, let's keep them in our mind, and then let's go do it. Here we are. Or somebody wanted but so then. Now, as we go through this, we're going to keep in mind that we're focusing on chapter 10, and there's certain problems that Ellen encounters in chapter 10 that are just connected with chapter 10. There are other problems that are connected to her whole big problem throughout the entire book, which is she's trying to deliver this bread. And so as we're going through, you're going to kind of have to make some educated decisions. Are you going to just include the portions about this chapter, or are you going to connect those portions to the entirety of the book? And so as we're working through this together, I'm going to try to do my best to show both, but just know with a summary where you include both the bigger problem of the whole book and the chapter, you're going to have to do a little bit more explaining. All right. We'll also be using the text to help guide us, and so be ready to look onto your pages as well, because that's where you'll find this information. The first part for everyone is quite simple. The most important character throughout this entire book is Ellen. So for our somebody, we should simply write Ellen. There's somebody. Now, moving on to the next part, what she wanted. For each of these sections, I'll give you a minute to pause the video, go find what you think, the evidence from the text that shows it. We don't have to write the evidence for a summary, but we should be referring to the text to help us figure it out. And then I'll show you what I found. And so right now, pause the video for you wanted. And now that you're back, let's go find in this chapter what she wanted. I'm going to break this into two parts. The first part is she wanted to get to Elizabethtown. That's been her whole goal this entire the time. So I'm going to change my writing a little bit. I'm saying she wanted, I don't want this to be orange, I want this to be black. Let's do it. Ellen wanted, one, to get to Elizabethtown. That was her main goal throughout this entire story. So we want to make sure that we try to get this. But in this chapter specifically, we see a different problem too. Yeah. Let's take a look. So I'm going to switch back to my camera for a second. You'll find this, and the wanted and the but will be connected here. You'll find this on page 128. We got it? Here we are. Here's the problem. She wanted to get to Elizabethtown, but right here, Miss Murdoch is saying, there'll be no running out where these soldiers are tonight. If he gets shot, I've got 4 boys to raise, so you can take off those breeches and let them dry. He's not going to Elizabeth, and neither are you. Yeah. And so this actually speaks to 2 problems. The first is she wants to go to Elizabethtown, but it's dark and she has no way to get there. Yeah. And so we can say that Mrs. Murdoch doesn't want her husband taking Ellen there. And then that directly connects to the second problem, the other thing that she wants or doesn't want, which I marked in page 129. She says she has to take off her breeches and risk that woman finding out she was a girl. That is the second part of the problem. She doesn't want to be found out or discovered. Okay? And so we found our problems are wanted, but one, she wants to go to Elizabethtown, but Mrs. Murdoch won't allow her to go because she fears for her husband. And also she doesn't want to be found out that she is a girl, but Mrs. Murdoch insists that she gets undressed to dry her clothes. And so, camera back. Making sure we're going to the correct screen. So another thing that she wanted is she wanted not to be discovered that she is a girl. Okay. But, again, directly connected. The but for her to get to Elizabethtown, Mistress Murdoch, as she's mentioned in the book, doesn't want her husband risking his life for someone she doesn't know. Spelled mistress wrong. Oh man, I should check the book and it doesn't. That was just a typo. Spell check is amazing, isn't it, guys? Now 2 is connected to not to be discovered that she is a girl. Miss Murdoch insists that she takes off her clothes, takes off her clothes to dry. All right. So we've got 2 things that she wanted, 2 things that are stopping her from getting those things. One that again is the bigger picture of what she wants throughout the whole book, and then the second is the one that's specific to this chapter. And then actually later on, I think we encounter almost a third problem, but we can try to connect that into an important event. Otherwise, our summary is going to sound like it includes way too much. And so, what does she do? Well, let's think about this first problem. She tries to get to Elizabethtown. At first, she offers to pay Mr. Murdoch, but that is before... Oh, I'm sorry. I'm giving you guys the answer before you have a chance to think about it yourself. Take a moment now and pause the video. Now that you're back, here's our thinking. Before Miss Murdoch is in the picture, she tries to pay Mr. Murdoch to take her. But actually, after Mistress Murdoch says no, she decides to run away. And we find that on page 134. So I'm going to come back to the camera very quickly. On page 134, says, Mistress Murdoch couldn't see her running down the road, for she was out of sight with a loaf of bread in her trembling arms. You can also use pages 132 and 131. She flew through the gate on the bottom here. She flew through the gate and across the road and hid among the trees. Okay. That shows that she ran away. So, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. I'm going to talk about this through the book now, and then we'll figure out how to put it into our summary. When she runs away, this is what makes great stories interesting. It creates a new problem, right? Right here on page 131, it shows us the loaf of bread. She had left it on the hearth. So she creates a new problem for herself. She ran away, and since she ran away, she forgot the most important part is that the bread there she was supposed to be delivering. And then down here, we see that Miss Murdoch, she says, "Here, pig, turn that soggy old bread into pork." Miss Murdoch actually throws the bread to the pig. And Ellen was afraid of pigs. Right, so that creates a new problem for her after she tried to solve her old problem. And then later she does solve it. When she tries it, 132 says she snatched, this is on 132, snatched her cap from her pocket and swished it across his eyes, back and forth across his eyes. The pig tossed his head and snored in rage. It was a terrifying sound, but when Ellen saw the bread fall from his mouth, she scooped it up quickly and darted out of his way. Okay. And so that all happens as a result of her trying to solve her problem of not being discovered and running away. And so in our summary, we've got a little bit of a tricky issue here. That's why I said the strategies don't always work 100%. But we can still use them to help us out. We just have to make it sound well when we're done. We might even want to put that in there. We might, or put this in a but. Something else will happen. This is kind of connected to get to Elizabethtown. We can even add and deliver the message in the bread. This is another but that comes up. Mistress Murdoch, I did it again, throws her bread out to the pig. And so now that we've included those extra parts of the problems, that'll help us write a summary that makes a little bit more sense. Now, so how does she try to solve the problem? Again, she tries to run away. And that's from Mistress Murdoch. But like we said, that kind of solves these first two problems, to get to Elizabethtown and not to be discovered. But it doesn't help us deliver the message in the bread. And so that kind of leads to our then that we can use. And so if you want to figure out how to phrase this then, again, pause the video now and try to figure it out. Now that you're back, she tries to run away from Mistress Murdoch. Then she realizes that she forgot the bread. And that Mistress Murdoch has fed it to the pig. We can add on top of this that she bravely gets the bread back from the pig, even though she was terrified. And so that way we've included this new problem that happens as a result of Ellen trying to solve her old problem of being discovered as a girl and trying to get to Elizabethtown on her own. Excuse me, I'm sure that hurt your ears. So, now that we've, again, used this framework, the somebody wanted but so then, we've got to put it together in a logical way, still use it to write our summary. So, like I mentioned in our strategy, we have to make sure we're mentioning the text that we are summarizing. So again, if you want to try this on your own first, which I encourage all of you to do, pause the video, and then when you come back, we'll make one together. Hey, here we go. The text that we're summarizing is Chapter 10 of Toliver's Secret. So in Chapter 10 of, and then this is a book, so it should be capitalized and underlined, Toliver's Secret. Ellen, oh, I forgot about this. If you notice, there's something missing from our somebody wanted but so then, and that's the setting. Okay? It's usually important to include the setting, but it doesn't really fit into this strategy, and sometimes the setting isn't that important. In this case, it certainly is, because a lot of this takes place at the Murdoch's farmhouse, so we should include it. Ellen arrives at the Murdoch's farmhouse. All right, so we've got our somebody. What does she want? She wants to continue, go to Elizabethtown, but Mistress Murdoch doesn't want her husband Man, my typing is awful today, I'm sorry. To risk his life trying to help someone he hardly knows. And now let's include that second one. Mistress Murdoch also wants Ellen to get out of her wet clothes. But Ellen does not want to be discovered. Now, or so, Ellen, we can say because of these things, because of this, Ellen runs away. Now, here comes the tricky part, because when she runs away, that creates the new problem. When she runs away, this is our then. Okay? She forgets the bread, and Mistress Murdoch, this woman seems to cause lots of problems, throws it to the pig, throws it to the pig. Ellen bravely gets the bread back from the pig, even though she was terrified. And continues her walk to Elizabethtown. Now, you might notice that again, we've included all the things that we mentioned here. Some of it is a little bit different in order, but this is a very logical summary, a retelling of the story that happened in chapter 10. So even when you're using strategies like somebody wanted but so then, that it's important that when you're writing your summary, in that here, writing your summary, that it makes sense. And I try to imagine as if I were telling it to a friend who had not read the story, that they would be able to understand what happened after hearing my summary. Right? So if you came up with something similar to this, you're doing excellently. Let's close out. How does Mistress Murdoch feel about fighting for freedom? We can tell that she puts the value of her family over that of being a free and independent country. I won't go through the camera, but you can look on page 127. She says, I said times were better before the war started. Everything was peaceful and we farmed our farm and no soldiers bothered us. I said King George is all right. He didn't bother us none. Why do we want to change things? And so she feels like fighting for the freedom is too risky, and things were fine just the way they were, that they should not have ruffled the feathers and started that. You may agree with her, you may disagree with her. A lot of people during that time shared her opinion, and a lot of people thought she was wrong as well. And then this, you know what? I'm not worried about this question right now. Not connected to the story in a deep way. So let's just say goodbye. And that is the end of lesson 31. Hope this video again was helpful, that it helped guide you and understand some things you may not have understood before, and I hope you were able to come up with a good summary and some strategies that you can use in the future to help you summarize more quickly and efficiently and in more logical ways. As always, if you have comments or questions, make sure that you post those into Google Classroom, and I'll see you on the next video. Stay healthy. Goodbye.